Hello and thank you for buying Henson's Flying Machine's Liberty Raider revised kit. To build this kit you will need a straight edge with a 90-degree corner, a sharp knife or scalpel, some balsa cement or super glue, a nail file or sanding paper, and to begin the kit you will need to number the parts on the sheet using the parts list provided in the box. All of the parts come in these balsa sheets here. This particular kit comes on 5 sheets. All parts are laser cut, and to remove any part just use a sharp knife and gently cut away the tabs. Make sure to support the piece as you remove it from the framework. Now, the first piece you're going to start with are parts 1A and 1B, the sides of the fuselage. Remove these from the wood and gently trim away any excess tabs, like so. With parts 1A and 1B cut out, you can start by fitting part 2A, which is the wing lower support and goes here in the rear of the 2 holes on the bottom of part 1A of the cockpit. Now pass that wing support tab through the lower slot and allow it to sit like so on the fuselage. Now with that loose, find part 3A, which is the cockpit floor support. That part will sit like so, flush with the bottom, creating a 90-degree angle between 2A and the fuselage. Now start by gently gluing that just here to the bottom of the fuselage with a little touch. And then make sure that it's running parallel all the way along the support for the fuselage here, and just glue it in place. Don't go overboard on the glue, just make sure there's enough to tack it together. There you go, that is now vertical and in place. Ensure that using a 90-degree edge, the floor and part 2A are 90 degrees apart, which will mean that when you tack it to the side of the fuselage it will hold true. And then once you're happy with that, just a little bit of glue, hold it where it should be. Allow that to dry in place. The next part to fit into place is part 4A, which is the front of the cockpit. It fits into this tab here just forward of this curve, and you may need to very slightly trim the tab to go into the slot. However, it can just be pressed in carefully. Be careful not to break the wood. Make sure that that's vertical. Compare it to the cockpit floor. Make sure that it's flush and sitting just slightly back a bit there. And when you're happy with it, well, it is parallel, just glue it in place and to the slot, like so. With the build-up starting to come together, it's now time to fit 1B, the opposite side of the fuselage. Now make sure that the lower wing support is going into the same slot, and just push that down parallel, and then the tab on part 4A again pushes into there, and you can compare the fit all the way around. You need to confirm that the cockpit floor is, of course, making a great contact there and giving you a solid center structure. Then just tack glue around there wherever it comes into contact, and also on part 4A, the front of the cockpit, like so. Just hold that until it's set. It's always a good idea to put it on the flat surface just to check that everything is parallel and it's fitting together correct. The next part of the design is part 5A, which is the rear of the cockpit, the start of the tail section. Now this fits into the 2 tabs here, further behind the tabs in the back of the curve. Make sure that you do not use this forward curve here, as that has another former coming in later. Now slot that down into the 2 tab holes like so. Be careful not to put too much pressure on the wood as you slot it in. And just gently ease it in. You can of course just trim it very gently with a knife if you want to. Pull it back like so. Laying the whole unit flat on the surface will help you align everything together, and then just tack glue, especially into where the tabs pass through the fuselage. Like so. Make sure that you do top and bottom as well, but be careful not to glue it to the surface that you're working on. Alright, let that dry for a minute. The next part that fits is the wing support, which goes into slot forward of the main fuselage wing support. Now that goes with the dihedral upwards, slots into these 2 slots like so. Now it should fit just there, flush with the bottom, and as you can see the cutouts in it might make it a little bit difficult to source, but just adjust it slightly until you're happy with it. See there how it follows exactly the contour and comes flat to that surface. Then glue this in place. If you are going to be flying it under a heavier weight, it can be an idea to cut a second one of these out of some scrap wood you've got, or cover the entire thing in PVA glue to add strength to it, or you can even bond in a little bit of cardboard or something just to that shaft to give it a little bit extra strength. Right, the next part to fit is the nose of the aircraft, part 8A, which is the nose base. This fits on the very front of the aircraft by slightly edging the fuselage sides apart and dropping the 2 tabs at the top into the tab receiving slots there. Now you need to make sure that it's aligned flush to the front, and just like so, gives you a tiny bit of edge all the way along, and then perfectly straight, which you can do by sight. And once you're happy with it, just glue it along the inside edge there, both sides. Make sure you get a nice strong bond on that. Then wait for that bit to dry properly. The next part you're going to need is part 6C, which is the same as 6A and B, apart from, as you can see, very slightly shorter without the tabs on the side. Now this part fits into the bottom of the fuselage here, just forward of the cutaway to the wings. Now you want to make this parallel in the same line with the bottom of the nose, and just put it together like so, by slightly pinching the fuselage together just forward of the davit with the diagonal sections arching downwards. You can of course move it more forward, just be on the safe side. It's just a framework that's going to support the bottom of the nose. Once you're happy with it, just glue both sides in place. Like so. So 6A and 6B are spare parts that can be used at the front for more reinforcement, especially if you're going to modify the aircraft and build some electrics into the nose, or you want to run a couple of spars along the front, do some design. But in this particular one, we don't actually need to use them, so I'm going to leave them out for the purpose of this demonstration. The next part fit is another optional part, but it looks great, which is part 9A, the dashboard or cockpit front. Now that fits just here, just behind part 4A, and it's angled backwards, like so, or of course can be fitted flush, just for a little detail. Now with the instrument panel, it's quite nice to cover the back of this with some black paper or black card, or if you're going to paint it black, then just put a little bit of white paper behind just to give some detail to the instruments, and you can draw in some instruments if you want. I'm going to mount it slightly angled, almost flush, just like so, and to do so I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the top here. If you're going to fly the aircraft, it's probably better to leave it out, reduce as much weight as you can. But for this model, I quite like it, so I'm going to put it in. Let it glue a little bit, and then I'm going to touch the sides as well with a bit of glue to hold it in place. Like so. Let it dry a little bit before moving the model around too much. Now the next part is part 10A, which is the wing brace floor. Now be very careful when cutting these sections out. There are inserts which come in and can be cut out. However, if you want a lot of strength in the wing, you can leave them in there and just glue them in place along the tabs. For this purpose I've cut it out, and that fits along the bottom here into this cutout slot. Now, one thing that is important with this model is that you make sure that the two cutout rectangles are towards the front. They're going to hold the landing gear later. Now just push it forward a little bit, make sure that the spacing on each side is equal and that it's straight into the airframe, and then glue it along the edges and where it comes into contact with the internal floor. Make sure that it's glued to the fuselage on the sides as well. You've got a strong bond there. Also, if you can, just glue it to the cross braces as well. There you go. Now you get an idea for what the fuselage is coming together like, and we'll work on the tail section next. Right, before we finish the tail section, we need to fit the top of the cowling, which are part 11A, B and C. The most important part being part 11A, which is like so, fits to the top of the cowling and needs to be absolutely central the whole way along and flush up to that front section there. Now you'll notice there's a curve towards the rear and radiator vents towards the front, so just make sure that your spacing on each side is equal and that it's parallel, because it will highlight any changes on the sides. Glue everywhere it comes into contact. Just like so. If you tab glue first, then you can always slightly pull it away just to kind of readjust any fitting. And always remember to dry fit before you glue. There we go. That's 11A in place. The next part is 11B, which, as you can see, the curve goes downwards towards the back of the fuselage, and that slides in just like so. Make sure that the gap on each side is equidistant and that it is perfectly parallel to 11A. Now, as you can see, it does just touch into the instrument panel there. If you have the instrument panel up vertically and flush, you will need to slightly trim it away, but of course anything this angle and beyond you don't need to. Hold it in place and then just spot glue anywhere it's in contact before we run a bit of glue down the seam later. Right, with 11B in place, do 11C in exactly the same way on the opposite side of the fuselage. It starts building up some of the detail on the Liberty Raider. Again, be very careful that everything's aligned parallel and that you're happy with the fitting before you glue it in. And then just run a little bit of glue in a few places, fit them all together, a nice strong bond, and there you are, starting to take shape. The next part to do is part 12A, which are the bottom of the cowling here and form exactly the same as the top but on the lower section. Now again, start with 12A, the central part, and align it like so in the middle, pushing backwards like that and straight to the front, glue into place. Nice strong bond on this one. Any nose heavy landings are going to push against there. Same with the top, you need a bit of strength to it. Now 12B and C fit in exactly the same way, just on the sides. Just make sure that they're aligned where they fit in. You can, of course, once this is all together, sand all of these into a rounded shape, which is why you have a squared off edge. But there are some more curves to build up as we get further into the model. There we go. That gives you now an idea of the build-up of the nose of the aircraft. With the nacelle and cowling complete, the next part we want to start putting in is part 13A, which is one of the rear formers of the fuselage here. Now this has tabs on the bottom and slots into these tabs on the lower section of the fuselage. Slot it straight into the tabs like so. Now you're going to need to gently pinch together the tail section. Now it's very important that as the tail section tapers off, that you keep it aligned and parallel to each other. Just do this by laying it flat like so and just comparing it on its alignment before you do any gluing. As you can see there, it looks fairly straight. I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to spot glue into these corners here to hold it in place. Let it take hold for a second and then glue along. The aim of this is to end up with the tail section perfectly straight, holding your tail plane how you want it. So just dry fit as many times as you want, just make sure of it. With the fuselage coming together now, it's time to start work on the tail section. We'll start with part 14A, which is this triangle here, 15A, tail upright, and 16A and B, which are the support sections for that. So 14A is going to fit straight here into this tab, sliding backwards. Now this may take a little bit of maneuvering to get into place. If you do have any tightness to it, just either using your sandpaper or a file, ease the ends apart slightly because you don't want to force it and crack the wood. Grain can be very delicate and you want a tight fit, but obviously not to crack it as you put it together. So slide that gently backwards into the wood, like so, and then push it backwards until the forward part of the triangle is flush with this section here. Make sure it's down flush as well. Part 16A fits below 14A, flush with the line here in 15A, above the wheel and with the sliced angle facing backwards. Just make sure that it's flush up against 4A, but do not press too much, as the whole point of this is to hold 14A and create strength. Glue 16A to 15A, and then turning it over, repeat the process with 16B again. Make sure that the angle is in line with the fuselage and that section is in line there. And just glue along this front into the hole and also on the tail wheel a little bit. It's a nice idea to run a little bit of glue across the tail wheel just to give it some strength on bouncy landings. With the tail section coming together, you need to start fitting part 17A, which is the front of the tail. Careful with this part as it is quite delicate. It's going to slide in above 14A with the flat side facing backwards. Now you may need to sand away some of the inside here very gently. Again, this has been made quite tight, but obviously you need it to slide in, so very carefully just sand away any excess. You can also trim this with a knife or sandpaper. I like to use a nail file just for precision. You don't have to take away much at all, just enough to gently ease it into there, like so. Now push it as far back as it will go, Being, again, very careful not to do any damage to the wood. And you're going to want the trailing edge to butt up straight with there. There we go. Just like so. With the tail section now assembled, it's time to fit it into the fuselage. Taking the fuselage, you want to just gently press the assembly into it. And as you can see, the cutaway slots in the tail will help guide you in, and these should line up with the inside edge there. And then just pinch the tail together very gently, allowing it to close around part 14A and using the top as a comparison to make sure that everything is parallel and marred up nicely. Make sure also that the horizontal is down flat into the tail of the fuselage. And just glue along that edge there, and also where the arms of the tail come into contact with the tail upright. I'll also put a little bit of glue just on these front trailing edges here. Make sure that everything is stuck well together and hold it until dry. With the tail in place, you can fit part 18A, which is the sloped rear part of the cockpit. Now that has tabs and fits just here on the back of the cockpit curvature. Now you may need to slightly ease the sides apart just to slot this in, and then just gently press it down into place into the tabs, like so. Again, don't forget, at any point, if something's not fitting quite right, you can just slightly trim it with either a blade or a file, because of course, wood being a natural material, there's always some very slight variances in there. And then once it's down flush, glue it in place into the tabs on both sides, like so. Laying the fuselage aside for a minute, we're going to start building up the first wing section, which is part 19A, 19B and the detachable aileron. 19A and B very easily slot together like so, and you can see the jigsaw pieces guide them into alignment. Holding it flat, just glue along that jigsaw cut there, and on the wingtip also press it together and then just glue along the seam of the jigsaw. Allow that to dry firmly, and then we'll start with the wing profiles. There are two types of wing profiles. There is one with one hole, which is for the wingtip. The remainder of the wing profiles have two holes and slot in along the wing like so. Starting with the wingtip, we will slot that in firmly like that, pushing it forward as far as it'll go. They're all aligned forward just to make sure that the curvature on the front is the same. Pop into place, push it forward, glue it, and then with the wingtip one, just glue along the outer edge like so, in order to get a nice joint on there. Then with one of the two hole profiles, insert it onto the inner edge. Again, push it all the way forward and then glue along that seam and front and back. Repeat this process all the way along, popping in the wing profiles into the slots like so. Making sure they're all aligned forwards, then gluing it in place. Now if you want to do any weight reduction on this aircraft, it's possible to remove every other wing profile, but of course if you're doing display or you're doing micro RC, you want a bit of strength in it, which is better to have all of the wing profiles in, and it's a much nicer look to it. Just glue them on the front and where they overhang at the rear. Like so. Now, with the aileron, if you are converting to micro RC, what you want to do is just trim these in line with this aileron cutout here. That will allow you to hinge the aileron and then give it the full arc of movement. As we're not going micro RC with this, I'm going to put the aileron in place and then glue it to the wing profiles. Like so. And that is the port wing complete. Now, when building the starboard wing, it's very important to remember to build a mirror opposite of the wing. So lay out parts 19B and 20B and then compare them so that they are perfect mirror. One's going to be the left side of the wing or the port side, one's going to be the starboard side, and just make sure you have that right. It's a common mistake and it will mean that you have to totally disassemble one of the wings to make it fit. And then just exactly in the same method, repeat everything in reverse. Again, solid wing profile on the outer edge, align forward. The solid profile is for the outer edge, as this one is slightly shorter than the others, giving the wing the curvature. And same order, same alignment, but everything in reverse. With both port and starboard wing sections put together, we can now trial fit to the fuselage. Now you'll see the cutout here, which is around part 10A, still has enough space for you just to slot the wing into there. And then with the wing you'll see the guides that pass through the fuselage, the wing struts. Pop that in like so, and then angle the wing upwards until those wing strut supports fit flush against the wing. You'll see there. And then glue the wing directly to the wing support struts. You can also glue forward support to the front of the wing profile, and then along where the wing actually meets the fuselage, make sure you get plenty of glue in there and a nice solid fit. Turn your knee over, same underneath. 10A needs to be very strongly bonded to the wing, give you that nice strong finish. Let that dry before moving on and doing exactly the same thing with the starboard wing. Fit into there, just align to make it right. Then bond in first the wing supports, and then where the wing touches the fuselage. There you are. You'll see there that the wing supports have created a lovely dihedral in the aircraft, which makes it fly quite smoothly in the air and almost self-righting. But before you put it down and glue it to the surface, just let it dry and let the wings rest against those while they're drying. I'm using balsa cement. I'm using super glue while making this, but it's usually recommended to use balsa cement. But that takes a little bit more time to dry, and obviously you need to hold it for it to set properly. The wings now dry in place. It's time to fit in the main wing spars 21A and B. These fit into the top of all of the profiles, and just slide it up to the fuselage over the top of the extending support and gently press it down into the top of each wing profile. Rock it back and forward just to make sure that it fits in nicely, and if they are all aligned forward, they should fit quite smoothly. Make sure you don't push it down too far, try and keep it flush with the top of each wing profile. Start by gluing it to the little support that comes out the side of the fuselage, and then just a little touch each place where it comes through the wing profile, just to hold it in place, all the way outwards to the wing edge. Then repeat that on the opposite side, butt it up against the fuselage, like so. And flush with the top each of these parts. Like so. Parts 22A and B are for the side profiling of the aircraft. Now these are optional as well. If you want a slab side and make it look like an earlier type trainer, that's fine, you can leave these out, but I quite like the design, so I'm going to rest these in here. Now, as you can see on the cutout here, there's a slight curvature. That's so that you put it a little bit higher, and then parallel flap to the side of the aircraft into the cutout, and just glue that in place like so, front and back, and the same on the opposite side. Just trial it, dry fit it until you're happy. Glue in place. Parts 23A and B are more detailing for the side here. Now there is an exhaust stack attached to this here, which fits like so. Now, it doesn't matter which side you put it on, that's entirely up to you. If you are covering the plane, it's probably going to be best to trim along here flush and then reattach the exhaust stack later. But as I'm not covering this at this stage, I'm going to glue it in place as a demonstration. So I'm going to have it on the port side of the fuselage. I'm going to glue it in exactly the same way as parts 22, just front and back, like so. And then 23B is the opposing side, which does not have an exhaust stack detail on it, but fits in exactly the same way. These, when you do cover the aircraft, will give it a lot of curvature and a very bulbous front to it, and build up towards that radial engine. Parts 25A and B are going to continue the line of that centre part backwards. So you want to make sure that it's in line with it, and then, as you can see, the rectangular section presses into this hole here, just forward of the last tail cross member. Now align this as best as you can, straight in line with part 24A, and then glue it to the fuselage. There's going to be a little stringer that goes in there and just helps finish off the shape. Now the back end of these are very delicate, and just be careful when putting them in. And just get your alignment right and glue like so. I'm going to start putting on some of the stringers. As you'll notice, there are 2 shorter stringers and 3 longer stringers. Now the 2 shorter stringers are a little more complicated, so we're going to fit those first. They are parts of 24A and B. Now we'll start by gluing one to this cutout tail section here, 24A. Now you want to align that back to 25A and forward there. So we'll put a little bit of glue along there. Then holding it in line with 25A, we're going to butt it up like that. Let it sit backwards, and then as you can see, the cutout in 25A and use a very sharp blade to just slightly cut that away. Be careful not to break it, and then gently press into the cutout of 25A and glue it in place. Now that stringer is quite a delicate part, but it continues the curvature all the way back down the fuselage, and you want to repeat the same on the opposite side, exactly the same way. If there is any mistakes being made in the alignment of 24A, you can fix them now before you do any covering on the model, and just arch that backwards. Show me appropriately. Don't forget, of course, when you're working with Balsa, it's very important to support it if there is any weakness. Now, press into place, and if, like this one, it's standing a little bit proud, I'm just going to ease away some of the excess there. The three longest stringers are for the top of the fuselage, and these are going to fit like so backwards. Now start with the centre one and just pass your stringer underneath the tail there and slot it into the top of the fuselage shapers. Now begin by pushing it down and then gluing it into the rear former, then into the next former along, and making sure it's pressed down flush to the rear of the cockpit, and then just glue it to the bottom of 15A, the tail section, like so. And repeat the same process on either side with these stringers. Allow them to sit in, let it come all the way back to the tail section on these side stringers. Remember that it's going to be forming the shape, so you can adjust it slightly. Push it down nicely, glue it in place, and if possible just glue to that tail section there. Do the same on the other side. And that's going to form some of the curvature of the rear of the fuselage. And then once you're happy it's dry, just using a flat blade in line with the rear of the cockpit former, just very gently shear that off. A nice little flush finish on it, and of course then if you want to you can sand any excess away there. And with the stringers as well, if you're going for a very nice rounded look, you can sand all of these sections away here. Just very carefully pare off the rough sections, including the side of the fuselage, and get those curves going on, which will make it look nice and rounded. The details of the aircraft now start to come together. This aircraft comes with a mounted machine gun, which starts with part 26A and then 27B and C. Now of course this is optional, you don't have to fit it, but if you do, glue parts 27A and B to the machine gun like so, and a little bit of a tab along there, and then just make sure that the profiles match up on the sides. There we go. Same on the other side, of course, following the profile of the gun. Now, one thing that does look quite good with these is if you're going to use a file, just round off the edges of the machine gun to give it a rounded barrel look to it. You can sand all the way down into these holes here, means that they will stand proud and look quite good. Now you don't have to go all the way back, just round it off You don't even have to do it at all, and you don't have to fit it if you don't want to, but that fits into these slots here on top of the nacelle, like so. Now, you can angle it any way you like. I like it flush like that, so I'm going to pop it in there, and then just a little bit of super glue on the tabs, and it fits perfectly there, and I'm aligning it forward. Parts 28, A, B and C are the windscreen of the aircraft. Now this of course is totally optional, you don't have to fit it if you don't want to, but I think it looks quite good. It is a bit of a wind restrictive if you are flying it. You can always replace it with a bit of clear plastic, but start with 28B, which as you can see is this angled V, and then you want to position it with the pointy part upwards and the open legs downwards, elongated leg forward, and you want to go about 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeters in from the outside and put it in like so. Now before you put the other side in, part 28A has to go underneath the back of the gun like so. Otherwise it won't be able to slot through. 28C fitted in exactly the same way. Touch of glue on the bottom. And then fitted 1 millimeter inside there. And you can lay the windscreen backwards on top of it like so. And then just a little bit of glue on there. Sit it in like so. Now you can move these outwards, you can angle them, just play around with it, dry fit it until you're happy with how it's fitting. And as you can see, it's slotted together like that. A little bit of extra glue on there, or painting it with wood glue, will make it a bit stronger for flights and landings, so that works. To fit the landing gear, you're going to need parts 29A, B and 30A and B, which are these two sticks like so. The undercarriage fits into these slots here on the inside of the wing like so. Now you'll notice that the more cutaway side is forward. Now, lay the aircraft down gently. You can put a little cradle underneath it if you want. Put the undercarriage into the slot like so and allow it to hang free. Now part 30A is going to fit into the cutout here on the same side as the landing gear, and then lay outwards as a bracing like so. Now dry fit this, test it that it's where you want it, adjust as necessary, hold everything in place and glue all of these surfaces together. Of course if you're flying it, don't use a landing gear. It's always better to cover it before you try and put the landing gear on. It just causes a big hassle later. And it has a tendency to shear off during landing, so as well as messing with the aerodynamics. So it's better to only use it if this is a display model. This kit comes with optional foam plastic wheels which need to be fitted through this hole here using a method of your own improvisation. Now they can be fitted on the inside or the outside, and either use a brass tack or a piece of wire looped through, glued off on the inside and on the outside. Now don't fit them of course until you finish building everything else, or they will be very difficult. With the airframe almost complete, it's time to fit the tail sectional control surfaces. Now, if you are converting this, it's best to make some small paper hinges out of little cutouts, cut up the instructions and just glue them to both surfaces. Leave about 1 millimeter between to allow for some turning. Also, you may need to slightly trim here on the inside if 14A has come back a little far. But if it is a display model like this one or a free flight model, just glue along the edges like so. Then you can fit the tail upright, make sure that you've got a nice strong joint on there, and fit it perpendicular. Of course you can always fit it slightly offset so that your aircraft will have a little bit of drag to one side. Now the same with the control surfaces at the back, parts 17B and C. These can either be paper hinged or, as I'm going to do with this one, just butt jointed into place with glue along the surface there. Now align this towards the outside edge just as a guide so that you get a nice straight line on there. Make sure that the control is flat. Another thing you need to do is make sure that they are both at the same angle. Now it's alright to angle them slightly upwards, give you a bit of lift if you're throwing it around, but you need to make sure that they are both the same and at the same angle. There we go, that's together. Now additional parts in this kit are these small little parts here, which are 32A, B, C and 33A and B. Now these are extra parts for attaching your radial engine. As you know, with this upgraded kit there is an optional 3D printed radial engine that comes in your kit, and that simply glues straight on the front there. You can cut away any of this section here and then you can build up to it using these rounded sections on the top here. There's two different sizes. Just allows you to build up more contouring, like so. You can do that on the front there and on the sides here. Trim back these areas a little bit and it'll give you a more rounded feeling to the aircraft, especially with that radial. Now if you are going for rubber power with this, you'll notice you've got the free flight rubber in the kit. You'll have a matchstick which will fit here behind 13A, this section here. Just trim the matchstick and glue it solidly behind, and then you'll have your cotter pin attached to your rubber and your wooden bearing. That will dangle through the front here and you can hook it through the little circle here, slide your extra wooden bearing over the top, then your propeller, and bend off. When you do that, make sure that you are covering the whole front here in PVA glue to give it some strength, or even super glue along the edges here. If you're using the radial engine, of course, trial fit the cotter pin first to make sure that it's moving smooth, or just slightly ease out the extra plastic in there. And that is the completed Liberty Raider Revised Edition. Thank you very much for buying Henson's Flying Machines.